Hi everyone, it's Derek Eberly with Mountain Man. Today I want to show you how to break down a deer with just a few simple items. This is something you can do at home if you have a nice cutting board table or even a stainless table. This is not something that we currently offer in our shop, but we have a lot of people asking, how do I debone a deer? We only take boneless venison currently, and so we're going to get you to that point. A couple things you will need: a hand saw, a 6-inch boning knife, a steel to keep that nice and sharp, and a small deboning hook. This is something we use in our shop every day. I'm very accustomed to using it. It keeps your fingers out of the way, helps you stay safe, and is very, very useful. Pick one up online, they're a couple bucks. So with venison, most times they're going to be field dressed out in the woods, and so this is not a really clean environment. So what you want to do when you're looking at a deer carcass is you want to clean it up as much as you can. Any hairs that you might see or even dirt can be trimmed ahead of time. There will be a little bit of waste in the meat, but it's much better than having contamination in your final product. So the place that you always start is with the front shoulders. Many of you know that these are easy to remove with simply a knife. There is no actual bone connections between the front leg and the carcass itself. This can be done by grabbing onto the front leg and pulling away from the rib cage, and you simply work with your knife until the entire shoulder blade is removed, being careful to include the cartilage at the top of the shoulder blade right here. So everyone has their own way to do the next step. I'm going to show you something that I think would be easiest to do at home. Here in the shop we use our bandsaw, and so we would remove the rib cage from the hindquarters at this point and cut it up farther on the bandsaw. Since I'm going to assume most people at home don't have that, we're going to do this all by hand. So the first thing we'll do is prep the flanks. These are the portions just after the rib cage, and it allows the deer to articulate. So at this point, if you want to, the tenderloins are right in here, and we're going to remove them now. We'll cut there. That one turned out much nicer. Once the tenderloins are removed, you want to locate the last vertical vertebrae, which is usually about 2 inches down from where the pelvis stops to angle and goes vertical. As you can see, that can be done with only a knife. So now we can remove the neck section. Typically, you would just look at where the rib cage starts, maybe take about 6 or 8 inches off, depending on the size of the animal. Next, and this is definitely personal preference, you do not have to do it this way, I like to remove the rib section from the loin section. So this is going to be your back straps on the top side of the deer, and we're going to make that, you'll see in a second why I'm doing it this way. Oh, one more rib. The reason I like to remove the rib cage at this point is because A, it gives anyone who is helping you something to work on a while, but then you can also flip the top of the back straight up like this, and it's very stable to work on. So at this point, we're going to remove the back straps. You could have done that while it was hanging. I like to work on it this way, very controlled, and I can be very precise as I debone this. So what we will do now is remove the loin, or the back straps as a lot of people call them. I'll use my hook, and I want to locate what some people call the rubber band. It's a large tendon at the base of the neck, and that is not something we want to eat, but it does indicate the very center of the back. And so I will just follow this bone, the feather bones as we call them, the top of the spine, down along all the way. Now I can flip it around and begin to remove the bottom half of the loin, right on top of those ribs. I want to follow it. Once we have cuts made from the top and the side, we should be able to just trace down along that spine and remove that very easily. And there you can see I did leave a bit of, on a beef, what would be called the chuck portion. So we will remove that. But it does allow you to keep that extension of the loin as far as you want to go. It is still really good meat there. Come on. Now that we have the spinal column clean, this can be given to our trimmers for final cleanup. And I'm going to turn my attention to the loin. This is the prize of every deer after the tenderloin. And we're going to do some interesting stuff here. All right, so first we want to start by removing the fat cap. This was a nice fat doe, and so deer fat is not really valuable. It doesn't taste very good to people, so we just want to remove that, and that can go for further trimming. Now we're left with the loin properly. One thing you want to note is that on the top side of the loin, which would have been the top of the animal, there's quite a bit of silver skin, or sinew, as it's called. For what we're going to do here, we're actually going to remove it on this particular loin, and then I will show you how to make butterfly steaks on the other one. So on most deer, this is not going to be a huge piece of meat, especially once it's cleaned up properly, but you can see we've removed anything that would be really chewy when you go to eat it. That will give us 4 roasts from this deer's backstrap that will be approximately 2 to 2.5 pounds each. We will clean up these tenderloins a little bit, remove any excess fat, and discard it. Again, that is not very good for eating. Next, we're going to turn our attention to some of the other items on the table. Next up is the front shoulder. You want to flip this so that the inside is facing upwards, and it's very easy to take the joints apart. There's one spot in here that we can remove with the knife. It is where the shoulder blade itself connects with the rest of the leg. You can usually find that pretty easily. See how quick I can do it on camera? By putting it over the edge of the table and making a cut straight across. Now you have 2 other pieces. We're going to start with the shoulder blade, flip it so that the inside faces up, and we just want to clean off the bone from the top. That's all we want to do for now, is make that nice and clean. Being careful to stay away from the cartilage at the top of the shoulder blade again. That will be crunchy in your burger. Simply outline the shoulder blade at this point and then flip it over. Find the medial ridge of the shoulder blade, which is usually pretty easy. It's the ridge that'll stick up. You'll see in a second where that is. And we'll just prep that down through on both sides. And then these should be pretty easy to remove, maybe even peel. And you get that really clean bone peel if you did a great job. That's all trim. On a beef, that would be a very small flat iron steak, not large at all. But we're gonna put that in our trim today. The petite or mock tender, you can see when you prep it right, it comes off very easily. One thing you'll notice is this big triangle of fat that has a very big gland in it. We're going to remove that as well. That's not desirable to put in our trim. It takes 2 seconds to clean that up and discard. All right, next we're going to look at the lower portion of the front leg. We're going to follow the bone. Anytime you can see an exposed bone, that's telling you to start there as a meat cutter. We're simply going to follow that around, being aware of the elbow, and just clean this bone off. I often like to put my knife facing away from myself. There's a lot of power in that angle, and it gives your wrist a lot more power than it would if you were cutting forward. Again, being sensitive to any large glands. This is the other part of that gland we saw on the shoulder blade. Remove that and discard. That can be cut up for our trim. And here I might use my hook, and we're going to clean off the lower portion of the front leg. If you know what you're doing, it really shouldn't take you long at all to get nice clean bones. So as stated before, anytime you see exposed bones, here you can see the top of the rib cage, you're going to want to start there and begin to clean this the side of deer off. It will allow you to slide your blade right on top of the ribs and create a really nice clean peel. Struggling. Trim up the rib cage a little bit. This is where you have to decide how much time you want to spend on your deer. Growing up, we would actually take the meat from the center of the ribs. In our shop, we do not do that typically, again, because that is your maximum contamination area, but you can know based off of what your deer looks like. Could also remove the diaphragm here, being careful not to catch any of the false ribs that exist at the very bottom where the ribs all join together here. It's made out of cartilage and is very, very easy. See if I can do it. On a hog, it's easier. Can actually remove it for deer ribs. I don't recommend that. They're very lean and chewy. Next, we're going to turn our attention to the neck. What I like to do is start on the inside of the neck, the very bottom would be on the animal, and just run my knife around and get as much of the meat as I can while staying very close to the bone. Again, this is very difficult and a little bit tedious. So I did an okay job. Deer necks are very difficult to debone. This piece still does contain a lot of meat. Some people will bake this, like roast it and then use it for a soup bone. This would also make an excellent bone for scrapple. This is the piece of meat that we got off of the neck. We want to remove that really large yellow sinew, as we do not want that in our burger. All right, now that we got the table cleared off, we're gonna go back over for the final part of the deer, the hindquarters. For me, this is the prize because these big building blocks, muscles that are in there, there's 6 big muscles in there that we can make jerky, dried deer, all kinds of cool stuff out of. I'm gonna show you how to do it. So we're going to take the hindquarters over to the table where we can divide them in half with the handsaw. You want to make a cut directly through the middle of the pelvis and then also the backbone. So once you have it cut in half, go ahead and set the hindquarters in a way that the inside faces up. This is somewhere you're going to want to look in the cavity of the pelvis here. That's a hot spot for dirt. You're going to want to trim any of that away. This one looks pretty good. We're going to start dividing it up from here. My first cut is going to be about 1 inch above the H-bone. So this is part of the pelvis here. We want to go about 1 finger width away. This comes from dealing with hogs and different things that we do here. This is how we've learned how to do it. In just a few strokes, you should be through. This is a sirloin on a beef, and the remainder of this hindquarter, you can actually take the lower portion of the leg or the shank off with just your knife. See if I can find the exact spot here and do it quickly on camera. And you can always usually find a little extra leverage by putting it off the side of the table. Those are the three main pieces that we want out of our hindquarter. We want to separate it into the shank, the hindquarter itself, and the sirloin. So I'm going to debone the shank and the sirloin separately, but we want to get to that big hindquarter, and I'll show you all the good stuff that's in there. So this is where your hook is really going to come in handy. This is called seaming out a hindquarter. So what we want to do is first remove what's left of the pelvis or the H-bone. You want to first make a cut directly on the lower side, and you want to find the ball joint in the pelvis where the femur connects to the pelvis. There's a small tendon in there. You can see me using the point of my knife. Once you get that, you should be able to remove that H-bone very easily. Well, somewhat easily. It can be difficult on these smaller animals. There we go. And set that aside for trimming. So we're now left with a proper hindquarter. What we want to do is remove the top round sirloin tip or knuckle, depending on where you are, and the bottom round. You can see that these are each named for the fact that typically when a butcher does something, they will set the inside of the hindquarter up. So our top round is going to be the one on the front. The sirloin tip will be the front of the leg or what connects to the kneecap, and the bottom round will be on the bottom. So the first thing you want to do is find the seam between the top round and the knuckle. So we will be able to see it pretty easily right here between those two pieces. Also, we see the exposed bone, so we want to start right there and trace that femur all the way down to the other place it's exposed at the bottom. That will allow us to get right to the bone and to expose the seam between the other muscles. Peeling, but also helping with your knife so that you do not rip any of the material. You can see very clearly the seams between the large muscle groups. And then there we can remove the top. That we will get to later. And we will continue to debone. All we want to do is take that femur, being cautious of the the kneecap there, and we just want to take that femur bone out of these muscles. And there you can see relatively clean. That can be trimmed a little bit more. The next seam you want to look for is between the knuckle and the bottom round, usually very obvious, and you can almost always just do it by hand. I'm going to remove a little bit of the shank. Again, you can see a gland and some fat there. We want to remove that. That's not going in our trim or with our jerky. As you can see, there's a bit of fat and sinew on the outside of these roasts. Because I really want a nice eating experience, I'm going to go ahead and remove these. Not all shops do, but if it's something you're doing for yourself, it's an extra step you can take to really make it a bit more tender. And we just want a nice round piece, maybe face it where the kneecap was, and that looks pretty good. That's your knuckle. Attention to the top round, as it would be on a beef. We're just going to take, there's a cap that lays on top of there. Actually, you can see it pretty clearly. Whoever skinned it made a cut there. We just want to go ahead and remove that, as that is just a covering muscle. It's not a part of the main muscle we're after. That's a pretty good looking top round. When we go to make jerky out of these, we will actually slice them against the grain so that the muscle fibers are very thin. When you go to actually eat your jerky, if you make it with really long muscle fibers, if you slice it with the grain, it tends to be quite a bit more chewy. We like the short version. Last but not least, we have the bottom round. We're just going to go ahead and denude that. That is the act of removing the sinew and or fat. And here you can see quite a bit of fat on that. I'm just going to go and skin that real lightly so I don't waste a whole lot of meat, but we want to remove that fat We don't want that in our jerky. And that is how you turn a hindquarter into the 3 muscle groups that you find in there. Each one of these is super usable for dried deer, which would be very similar to dried beef, for jerky, or even for stew cubes. And it definitely reduces down in weight quite a bit, but that is how you do it properly. That is what your butcher is going to want to see if you are bringing him material for jerky, because a lot of people don't have the capability to do that at home. I want to see these nice groups of muscles. Tiny pieces do not work well, and we do see that pretty often when people are doing it at home. So hopefully this helps you get better jerky. All right, folks, for this next part, I'm going to have my shop manager, Blake, show you how to cut a butterfly steak out of the loin of the deer, or the backstrap. So this would be if you don't want to make it into a roast, but would like some nice little steaks. We'll show you how it's done.
Alrighty, last time we did some loin roast out of this one, and this other deer, we're doing some nice back straps for you guys. Again, the important step is to take all this silver skin off you see, except on the back, because that is going to be the hinge of the butterfly. So, top again, remove all that chewiness. Careful not to take too much meat off, because you want a big thick steak. Once you're satisfied with that, square it up a little bit. And again, leaving that on the back is very important. Now, I'm gonna start from this side. We have silver skin back there and none up here. So I'm gonna do about a ½ inch thick. That'll give you a ½ inch on each side of this butterfly. So going down and hitting the silver skin and stopping. So you can see there, maybe I have left the silver skin on, the next stroke over, all the way to the table. And out, and see it lays open really nicely. It has it together, and it's gonna fry up beautifully in a pan. And I will just go down and do that out of the rest of them. Every other to the table, every other not.
All right, folks, thanks for watching this deer breakdown. This is how Mountain Man does it. There are lots of ways, but this is a way you can do it at home and get started. You can see we have everything broken down really nicely. We have our bottom rounds, top rounds, sirloin tip. We have our back straps, whether in roasts or butterfly steaks, and we were able to get 2 tenderloins out of the one deer, the other, they were not salvageable. It all depends on your field dressing. But thank you, folks, for watching. I really hope this helps. Bring us some deer or do it yourself. All that's left to do is grind and mix this. You can see we have our tubs of trim, and of course we discarded bulk of the bones, but you can make scrapple with that or bone broth as well. So thanks for watching. Catch you next time.